12 News is your local election headquarters. Now, we continue our Where They Stand series on WPRI.com and our 12 Plus Smart TV app. I'm Ray Bakari. Joining me today is Stefano Famiglietti, who is one of 4 Democrats running in the State Senate District 4 special election this summer. He's also a North Providence town councilman. This special election was called after the death of Senate President Dominic Ruggiero, who passed away in April, and the district itself contains all of North Providence and a tiny portion of Providence. Stefano, it's good to have you.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you for having me.
So for my first question, can you explain to those watching a little bit about yourself and why you're running for state senate?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you said, Stefano Famiglietti. I'm a councilman in North Providence. I've been on the North Providence Town Council for 6.5 years. I'm a lifelong resident of North Providence, went through the public school system in North Providence very proudly, did me well. I went to the University of Rhode Island, went to Roger Williams University School of Law. I'm licensed to practice law in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. I currently own my own law firm out of Providence, and one thing that I do love is my community, and I'd say that's the primary reason that I got involved in this election. I've done my very best to serve on the town council in North Providence and serve my community. With the unfortunate passing of Senate President Ruggiero, who was very dear to all of us in North Providence and the community, it was important to me to have somebody who has very similar, strong community roots to fill that position. Somebody who's from the community, grew up in the community, and who's been actively involved in the community. And reflecting upon that, I do feel that I'm the most qualified person to fit that role. I would draw upon my community experience, my connections in the community, as well as my governmental experience locally, in order to adequately represent the district and try to fill Senate President Ruggiero's shoes the best I can.
Looking at some policy now and some bills that lawmakers passed this session, because if you were a state senator now, you would have had to cast some crucial votes on these. So the first one, aside from the state budget, arguably one of the biggest bills was the ban on so-called assault-style weapons. Toward the end, there were 2 different versions of the bill being debated. There was the House one that banned possession, selling, buying, and manufacturing of these weapons, certain rifles and shotguns. And then the one that ended up passing this, an amended version, just only banned the buying, selling, and manufacturing and not possession. Where do you stand on that conversation?
Well, at the very outset, I would support common sense gun legislation. Safety is obviously a primary concern for everybody. With that initial iteration of the bill, I did have concerns with, particularly with the broadness of the language, definitional issues, as well as potential constitutional issues. As an attorney, I always keep that in mind because, these are codified constitutional rights, and I think that any legislation that we're dealing with, you have to really be deliberate and take care when you're coming up against constitutional rights. That being said, obviously, that second iteration came at the 11th hour of the session. So I really haven't had a chance to really dive deep into that and get through the definitions and see where I stand on that one in particular. However, what I will say is that as a senator, I think that you will find that I will be very deliberate in my approach to any piece of legislation that comes across my desk. That's how I am on the council. I'm very cognizant of the issues. And one thing about me is I'm willing to work with anybody and anybody to try to address the issues at hand. I think that's the best way to serve the population, specifically District 4, which we would represent. But as the community in Rhode Island as a whole, you really have to be deliberate in your consideration of this legislation and to be very collaborative and work with everybody to find the appropriate solution and appropriate balances. So that's really what I'm looking forward to whenever pieces of legislation come across my desk.
So it sounds like you oppose that House version and the Senate version. You don't have a stance on it?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know enough about it. But again, I would be cautious about constitutional rights. I think that we have to be fair across the board. If we value our Constitution, which I do, that includes the Second Amendment, and we need to take care with those issues and be, again, deliberate and make sure that they are constitutionally sound.
And I should bring this up because your stances on the assault-style weapons ban is a little bit different than your 3 other opponents in the Democratic primary. They all favored the ban. Before any legislation was voted on, there was a resolution that the North Providence Town Council passed, and I believe, if correct me if I'm wrong, you sponsored it, that said that the town opposes it, though it's non-binding.
Correct.
That speaks sound.
Yeah, correct. And again, that's going to that first House iteration version that came out. And those concerns that I expressed were the reasons for that. You know, when you have broad definitional issues and potential constitutional issues from, again, a legal perspective, it could violate the Second Amendment, could violate the Takings Clause of the Constitution. That's going to open up the state to liability as well. So I guess from my approach, rather than do a knee-jerk reaction, I'm very thoughtful in the way that I approach things, and I want to make sure that we get it right, too, while we solve the actual issues. So, again, coming across any legislation, I would be that deliberate and thoughtful and consider everything.
Now, moving on to the state budget, aside from the assault weapons ban, this was the actual biggest bill that passed, both in terms of size and impact on the state. Year to year, Rhode Island usually has these budgetary issues with the built-in deficit, and then there's a lot of conversations around how to fix that, whether it's cutting what some say wasteful spending. Some people say we need to maybe implement a millionaire's tax or get more revenue. I'll keep this question broad. If you can give me one thing you'd favor, what would it be to try to fix the state's budgetary issues?
Well, you know, it's definitely a delicate dance that you have to go through, okay? In general, I'm not in favor of increasing taxes. You know, you mentioned the millionaire's tax. It's something that I would look into, but generally I view it with skepticism because, you know, if you're going to be thoughtful about these processes, you have to understand that for every action that you take, there is a reaction to it. What does that law or increased taxes for those individuals do to our economy? That's something that I'd be concerned about. So one thing that I would like to look at, like I did on the town council, is roll up your sleeves and really dig into the budget. See if there is any areas that you can cut while maintaining these essential services. That's a balance that we do all the time in North Providence, and I'm proud to say that for most of my tenure on the North Providence Town Council, we've avoided tax increases while maintaining the essential services that people do rely upon. So I think that's what we need to do. We need to have somebody in there that's really willing to roll up their sleeves, that has done these types of budget analyses before, and so that's what I would be looking forward to with the state budget. One thing I will say, though, is that I do think this year's past state budget, I will applaud the General Assembly because they did have quite a difficult task ahead of them. And I will give a nod to the Senate in their initiatives to make sure that there were investments in our healthcare system, which, as we all know, is of big concern right now, as well as transportation and education as well. So it's definitely a fine balance and a little bit of a dance that you have to make in going through these budgets to make sure that you're not being overly burdensome to the taxpayers, but making sure you make those appropriate investments where they are especially needed.
I should also know we're taping this post-legislative session and before the primary in July. So now to sticking with the budget, you know, you have your North Providence ties, and that's a big part of the district, but Providence is also in the district, and they have a tricky budget situation, even to the point where Mayor Brett Smiley asked the General Assembly to approve for this only this fiscal year to go above the 4% cap for increase in taxes, but no higher than 8%, and that stemmed from a $15 million expense from a lawsuit with the school district. Two-parter, but starting off with the first part, would you have supported or opposed that bill?
Well, here's what I'll say, okay, not being intimately involved with it. Again, I'm somebody that you don't want to raise taxes on anybody. I don't think anybody really does. So I'm sympathetic with Mayor Smiley and the city council. They were dealt a pretty heavy hand with the lawsuit that you were talking about. Multiple millions of dollars that they have to find in order to invest in the education system. Now, they can't print their way out of that mess. So you have to also be a realist. While you generally need to be averse to tax increases, you have to be a realist. So what I can say is, without getting deep into the actual bill and the language itself, is that as a legislator, what I would do is collaborate with the local officials. Try to give them the tools that they need in order to be successful. Because as a local legislator, I understand the challenges that you have with local municipal budgets. So I would work with them and try to do whatever we can to avoid being overly burdensome on the taxpayers themselves.
And now, Councilman, I can understand that, but just to kind of go back to the original point of the question for those watching at home, it's an up or down vote on legislation.
Correct.
Or you could do the not voting, like going in the hallway and taking the phone call. But how would you have voted?
In that instance, I mean, all points point all indications point to that it was something that was necessary for the city in order to be able to balance their budget. We can't let Providence not balance their budget. So most likely I would have been in support of that given these unique circumstances.
And you mentioned collaborating with fellow policymakers to try and not have that kind of situation. That actually plays in the second part I've been asking all the candidates. Is there another way the city could have dealt with the situation to not need a tax increase above the cap?
Well, I'm not sure that they could do it at that specific time. At that point, you're dealing with the hand that you're dealt at that time. However, going forward, I do think there are ways that the state legislature can help our local municipalities. One thing from being in North Providence and learning a little more about Providence is that you have two very unique communities. North Providence is unique in the sense that it is vastly residential and there's not so much commercial. So that means that the tax burden largely falls on the residential taxpayers. So whenever there is a revenue shortfall, like we're potentially facing with the Fatima Hospital issue, the burden is going to fall on the shoulders of the residential taxpayers. Whereas in other communities that have more of a commercial or manufacturing base, you can spread the tax burden out a little bit more. Providence is in another unique situation with many of their properties being nonprofits and not taxable. So what I would like to do at the state level is give aid to these communities in these unique situations so they avoid these issues in the future. I'd like to really invest in our pilot programs, payment in lieu of taxes. That would help both municipalities given these unique situations because particularly in North Providence, any small revenue shortfall is directly going to impact our residential tax base, and we have nowhere to spread it out.
And then for my final question, speaking of Fatima, I'll also keep this broad because the topic of the healthcare crisis our state is facing is multifaceted, and there's a lot of solutions being presented. And to go a little bit more on what the healthcare crisis that we're facing is, you're seeing issues like what Fatima is facing, Anchor Medical shutting down, community health centers in Providence closing. And it boils down to, a lot of people say that want to take on this issue say we need to increase Medicaid reimbursement rates. That's the main solution we're hearing. In your opinion, what does the legislature need to do to address the healthcare crisis?
Well, I'll applaud the legislature. They did make those investments in higher Medicaid reimbursements for primary care physicians. It's extremely important. We have primary care physicians that are leaving the state. We're also happy that they were able to make their investments in hospitals and nursing homes as well. We need to make sure that we're competitive with the surrounding areas because if we lose our workforce, we're in some serious trouble. If we were to lose Fatima Hospital or Roger Williams Hospital, I'm not sure our state healthcare system would be able to sustain that increased burden. So we do need to make those specific investments from a legislative point of view and a budgetary point of view. So I applaud them for doing it. It's a step in the right direction, and we need to keep monitoring it and work with our healthcare partners, whether they be nurses, doctors, to see what they need. How can our state government help them maintain their competitive edge in their local region and make sure that our hospitals, doctors' offices, facilities are staffed? Because at the end of the day, any shortfall in the workforce is going to directly impact patient care. Patients will not be going to doctor's office because they're not there or because they're going to be concerned about long wait times. We can't have that. That's a recipe for disaster.
That's all the questions I have. Councilman, I want to thank you for coming down here,
you.
And I appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching this edition of Where They Stand. Remember, 12 News is your local election headquarters. We have all the other candidate interviews available on WPRI.com and our 12 Plus Smart TV app. For now, Ray Bakari, 12 News.